Our story today revolves around a young teenager who, due to the lack of boundaries in his community, is involved in activities typically reserved for adults. This environment has led him to be intimately involved with most of the women in his apartment block. When the adult males are called to war, he, due to his young age, is left behind as the only male among a household of women. He is overjoyed with this situation and expresses his gratitude to the divine. Greetings, dear family, and peace be upon you. Today, we present to you the popular movie What Every Frenchwoman, released in 1986. We kindly request your support by liking this video. Without further ado, let's dive into the movie. The story starts in 1914 in France. We meet a 16-year-old boy named Roger who is returning home from school for his summer break. His mother sends Mrs. Muller, a maid, in a horse-drawn cart to pick him up. Roger, intrigued by Mrs. Muller, can't take his eyes off her during the journey. Mrs. Muller notices this, but decides not to comment on it. Upon reaching home, Roger is warmly welcomed by his mother and Aunt Margaret at their large, beautiful house. Ursula, another maid, helps him with his luggage and asks if he remembers her. Roger confirms that he does. He is then introduced to Frank, an old friend of his father. As he enters the house, Roger is greeted by his younger sister, Bernard Berth, who gives him a big hug. Later, Berth takes Roger for a walk in the woods, where they stumble upon Mrs. Muller collecting fruits. In a surprising twist of events, Mrs. Muller lifts her dress to relieve herself, startling Roger. Later that evening, Roger dines with his family. His mother, a woman of stern disposition, insists on maintaining table manners. After dinner, Roger retires to his room, but peculiar noises draw him outside. To his astonishment, he discovers another maid, Helen, with a man just outside the door. Despite her initial resistance, Helen eventually returns to her duties once their encounter ends. Upon returning to his room and getting ready for bed, Roger finds Bert on his bed. She confesses her sleeplessness and longing to talk to her absent brother. Suddenly, Bert's babysitter, Kate, enters the room and reprimands her for leaving her bed, prompting Bert to hastily return to her room. Spotting Roger's rising blankets, Kate removes them, leaving a mortified Roger to cover himself. Later, Roger's elder sister, Elisa, arrives home with their father. She warmly greets everyone in the mansion, but only gives Roger a brief peck on the cheek. Their father then discusses his struggling business of selling medals to the military, which is suffering due to the lack of war. Soon, Roger catches sight of Helen enjoying herself near a cabinet, and he notices Frank observing the same. Roger then heads to the attic where he finds Frank in a compromising situation. Once Frank departs, Roger uses the telescope and spots a couple enjoying themselves. He then discovers a book left behind by Frank. The adult content of the book intrigues him, and he begins to read. When Frank returns, Roger can't help but wonder if Frank had experienced the same frustrations during his adolescence. Frank confesses he still feels the same way. Later on, Roger finds solace in a book of inappropriate fantasies, hidden away in the chicken coop. Suddenly, a servant enters the coop, causing Roger to quickly conceal himself. Not long after, Helen comes in to feed the chickens, only to be trapped inside by the servant through the window. Helen spots Roger and asks for his help, but then tells him to wait. As she seems to be taking pleasure in the situation, Roger grows suspicious. Before he can fully comprehend the situation, the servant departs. Roger comes to the realization that everyone in the house is engaged in intimate activities except him. He decides to approach Ursula in the kitchen with the intention of getting intimate. However, Ursula is shocked and reacts by hitting him on the head with a plate. Once she recognizes him, she leans in close to tend to his wound. Their moment is cut short by another maid who walks in. Feeling anxious, Roger sees Ms. Mueller and decides to pursue a romantic encounter with her. He follows her to a church, grabs her from behind, and begins to enjoy himself. Initially, Mueller tells him to stop, but then she begins to back him up by lifting her skirt. However, their plans are interrupted when a postman arrives to announce that war has broken out due to Germany's attack on France. Back at home, Roger's father is overjoyed about the onset of war, seeing it as an opportunity to expand his business. The war means that all the men in Roger's family must enlist in the army. Eliza and Roland share their final words before Roland leaves for war. As the other men march off to battle, Roger, being too young, is left behind. He finds himself the only male in a household full of women, a circumstance he appreciates deeply. Later, Ursula seeks Roger's assistance to move a mattress upstairs. In the bedroom, he playfully makes advances towards her, which she finds amusing. Ultimately, she undresses before Roger, and they share an intimate moment. Following this, Roger confesses his feelings for Ursula and proposes to her. Ursula responds with a light-hearted laugh, understanding that his proposal is likely a result of his first encounter with a woman. On his way out, Roger encounters Bert, who teases him about what transpired, but Roger remains elusive. He then aids Ursula in overhearing their mother's conversation with the priest. Their mother speaks about the challenges she faces due to her husband's fantasies, questioning their appropriateness despite her enjoyment. The priest reassures her that anything she does with her husband is not a sin. Their mother hears her children giggling and asks them to stop as they are causing a disturbance. Later that evening, Roger's father, a colonel with the freedom to come and go as he pleases, makes a brief visit home. That night, Roger finds Margaret and Kate secretly watching his parents' room. Later, Margaret finds Roger waiting in her room. He confides in her about his knowledge of her virginity and offers to help her. Despite her initial hesitation, they flirt, and this leads to another intimate encounter. The following day, Helen brings tea to Roger's room, encountering no interruptions in the hallway with all the men gone. As she serves Roger his tea and attempts to leave, he pulls her in for a close moment. Following this, Roger spends time in the garden with Berth. She questions whether her brother has been with Kate, Ursula, and the other girls. In a moment of boastfulness, Roger claims he has been with nearly all the women in the house. Upon seeing Elisa, he decides to follow her to the stables. While Elisa tends to a horse, Roger offers to assist her in removing her shoes. However, his touch becomes inappropriate. Overwhelmed by her emotions, Elisa and Roger share an intimate moment. In the subsequent days, all the women in the house, save for his mother, seek out Roger's company. He basks in the attention, often entertaining up to 3 women at once. After another intimate moment with Elisa, she shares her fears of a possible pregnancy with him. Suddenly, a jet flies overhead, causing her to pull Roger behind a tree to avoid being spotted by Roland. Upon landing, Roland announces the end of the war and the return of all the men. Roger finds himself in a precarious situation and begins to contemplate potential strategies to alter the course of events. Later that evening, Ursula visits Roger's room to reveal her own pregnancy. Before she departs, he requests a bottle of red nail polish. Shortly after, Margaret enters and discloses that she, too, is expecting a child. Roger believes that if Ursula marries her Uncle Frank, it will avert any potential problems. When Ursula returns with the red nail polish, Roger directs her to Elisa's room. Here, he instructs Ursula to apply the nail polish on his sister's bed sheets. Elise, seething with anger, is advised to get in touch with Roland and demand an immediate resolution. Meanwhile, Roger pays a visit to Kate's room, anxiously inquiring about her pregnancy status. His relief is palpable when she confirms she is not pregnant. In an unexpected twist, he proposes to Ursula, who gently turns him down, confessing her affection for someone else. As days pass, Roger's predicaments dissolve when the three women marry their respective partners. As his summer break draws to a close, he begins preparations to return to school. However, Helen arrives with the news of her pregnancy. Roland kindly offers to find her a suitable partner, but Helen firmly declines, expressing her desire to marry someone she truly loves from her many suitors back home. The story wraps up with Roger setting off for the city. As we conclude our movie, we kindly ask our viewers to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We appreciate your support. Thank you.